Now on to our next speaker, Dr. Jason Cross, who is the co-founder, vice president, and chief innovation officer, I love that title, chief innovation officer at the Foundation for Commercializing Innovation, FCI, which is a think tank focused on innovation strategy to align social and commercial impact. Prior to starting FCI, Jason was the founder and director of the Innovation and Technology Policy Lab at Duke University, where he led research on novel intellectual property financing and collaboration strategies to enhance efficiency and the accessibility of innovations. He taught courses on innovation and entrepreneurship for global health and development, and has extensive experience working with government, industry, and nonprofits in creating more inclusive innovation systems. He has a postdoctoral fellow in Science and Technology Policy at the University of Michigan, and received his JD in Global Innovation Law and his PhD in the Anthropology of Economics and Policy at Duke University. Dr. Cross is going to speak to us on retooling universities as platforms for health and social impact in the age of open innovation, the promise and challenge of teaching collaboration. Dr. Cross?
All right, it is quite a pleasure to be here with everyone. This is an exciting day of big, bold ideas, and it was nice to see that quote at the end of Dr. Jones's presentation. Some of our students put that on the back of a T-shirt, actually, that the ITP Lab had a year ago. So it seems to me that one of the big questions we're here to talk about today is how to harness universities as agents for social change. And, you know, on the one hand, this challenge presents opportunities for universities to advance their own goals around education, preparing students for the modern world, better equipping them to get jobs in a global networked economy, research opportunities, blah, blah, blah. But it's also a moral challenge because of the opportunity cost of not doing so. We live in an age where there's decreasing costs of capital and transaction costs that are often barriers to participate in solution creation, and failure to really push the envelope means we're allowing for what liberation theologists would traditionally talk about openly as structural violence, right? Failing to do what evidence now shows us that we can do. Perhaps think about it in terms of liberation innovation policy. So on that point, we have sort of two ways of thinking about this at the university leadership level. One is kind of programmatic approach of, you know, how do we align our strategies for best preparing our students in terms of skills and job preparation, maintaining or improving the kind of research quality of our faculty, you know, administrative goals of you know, expanding revenue, research funding, improving political capital, and social impacts usually up there also, right? But there's also a visionary approach, right? One that kind of rethinks at the level of vision the role of the university in contemporary society. And it's often, usually, and sadly, as someone, Duke is really on the cutting edge, and USAID's been a great partner in advancing kind of cross-disciplinary, cross-functional problem-solving approaches. Sadly, the humanists are often kind of marginalized. They'll self-marginalize, I'll give them that, but they also are not actively courted, and they're usually the ones who are most actively thinking about the ethical, political dimensions of innovation systems and practice. Who's included? Who's getting richer much faster than others? Who has access to technology that is developed, and who's going to have to wait for patent monopolies to expire? Who's exposed to greater risks and doesn't have political voice in the political system to push back against biased exposure to risk? Who has say, right? And so I think it's a challenge to think about the concept of innovation justice, the way that in environmental policy, social justice and kind of environmental concerns are fused, where we recognize that whatever we do to address environmental problems has disproportionate impacts on people. And so environmental policy is always about environmental justice. When we think about climate policy, right, who can, for whom was Katrina just an unplanned vacation? And for whom, was it, a real crisis or a threat of death, right? So I think that, on the kind of traditional industrial model of social change, the slide came out a little bit wrong. Imagine the society and innovation circles are separated. They're not touching, all right? This is what happens when you, switch from PowerPoint to PDF. And we usually think about society impacting, economy, politics, law, impacting innovation processes. That's a matter for business people and engineers. And then their outputs affect society. And usually, the industrial model of the university is sitting in the middle and kind of managing these inputs going one way or another. The networked age, right, we understand that the ways that we do innovation, right, is, whether we're the local economic boom that results from technology companies being successful is expanding opportunities for people that live there, or really kind of marginalizing them, pushing people out of neighborhoods that they grew up in, bringing in talent from elsewhere. The market pull of who has money, pours billions of dollars into research and development for what we call in the pharma world Me Too drugs with little or no therapeutic benefit over existing drugs. And meanwhile, diseases that affect small numbers of people go unaddressed, neglected diseases of the poor go unaddressed, and the emerging disease kind of pandemic threats that we talk about really they're a category of disease that has to do with these questions of justice and power and inequality, right? Because an emerging disease is a disease that all of a sudden might affect the privileged in the world, right? As long as Ebola was primarily contained in Africa, it was a neglected disease. It was a tale of a market failure. Oh, it's so sad, it's primarily killing Africans. But in a hyper-globalized age, right, when it became apparent that another episode might jump the pond, all of a sudden it's a biosecurity threat, right? So universities are at the center of this nexus, because not only are they producing technologies, they're training professionals who are going to staff government and businesses and so forth, but I think we got a sense of this from Dr. Jones's presentation. They're cultivating civic and professional consciousness of young people, of leaders of these institutions as they move forward. And they're also, they have the potential to support, encourage kind of creative, the sense of creative urgency that young people have to not wait around 20, 30 years for a problem to abate, but to do what they can now. Their impatience, right? The impatience of waiting for contemporary institutions to apply expert knowledge to get things right. So to understand the basics, sorry about this slide again. It's there should be separation, stuff got mumbled. But the point of this slide was just to really bring our attention to the physics and economics of how the world is radically changing. And it really comes down to Moore's law, right? So as computing power doubles on average around every 18 months, the capital and transaction costs required to participate in creative, productive problem solving, whether it's commercial, whether it's a social problem, whether it's a communication problem, whether it's a problem of meaning in some artistic sense, they come down, right? And when they were high, hierarchical organizations are required, states, big companies, to manage, organize, and coordinate creative, innovative activity. And the research university, is really, it's an institution that comes from that model, right? Here we can pool the research equipment, campus, we can harness the economies of scale to do research, to train at the cutting edge of technical and social knowledge, and therefore kind of plug into the problems that society is facing. And in today's age, capital and transaction costs go down. We see the rise of open and distributed innovation paradigms to solve problems all over the world, where you don't, Wikipedia can outcompete Britannica and transform the industry from an information company to essentially like a niche luxury good company for people who want to have leather-bound books in a room in the house, but then use their smartphone instead of opening the book when they need to access information, right? The way that after 15 years of open source software advocates pushing for policies that were more supportive of open source software because of the impact on society of essentially cheaper output and more participatory processes for value creation, it was Red Hat and other commercial operators, because the political institutions are usually captured by the powerful incumbent companies of a prior economic paradigm. And so it's the companies that say, you know what, all right, we've been, forget your policy discussions. We're just going to go out there and make software that is better using a business model that doesn't require all the overhead of it at 15 years ago, the behemoth Microsoft. And today, right, within a few years, IBM reinvented itself around open source products. Today, Microsoft itself puts out open source software and has adopted a subscription service model that is the model that Red Hat went out to commercialize open source software with, right? And so this is the transformation that's happening. Now, one thing that is not clear from this slide is that the original slide had is on the left side you have universities corralling resources, skills, facilities, information, and on the right hand in the networked information age, we have the potential of the highest value, this is my proposition to you, the highest value resources, skills, creativity, and facilities are distributed, and they're out there. And that rather than the university be this top-down organization for gathering what's required to solve problems, in ways consistent with Dr. Jones's presentation, it's a matter of being a platform for enabling people to go out and connect to solve problems. So in the, I'm going to share really briefly with you one experiment that I was involved with. The origin story of the Innovation Technology Policy Lab is tied to the Global Innovation Labs at USAID. Raj Shah and Alex Dagan and Tikora Jones came down several years ago. I was talking with Alex. He was the head of science and technology efforts below the administrator. And they were they did a great job of talking up this new paradigm of investing in innovation and changing the dynamics of what's possible on the ground in developing countries and so forth. And because of my background in public interest, intellectual property, and innovation law and policy, I had a really intriguing talk with them about, or Alex specifically, about, have you thought creatively about intellectual property, about licensing, about where you might get creative with financing so that you might not need a monopoly business model to scale out a technology, but you might be able to do so on an open basis. Because maybe a smart grid technology developed for California is not optimally designed for Tanzania. And maybe the engineers, entrepreneurs in Tanzania that could adapt it and make it appropriate might be blocked from doing so by global patent law and other kind of licensing restrictions. And maybe Tanzania's ability to scale out this game-changing technology is limited by the high price, and so they can only scale it out to 1/5 of the territory that they would be able to otherwise. And I was encouraged because this was part of the Obama transition, I think, but I was not expecting an invitation to come up to DC and talk with USA leadership about these ideas. And I found tons of enthusiasm for the promise of open innovation. They were already moving on promoting Creative Commons licensing for educational materials. They were already promoting open source software where it was viable. They were already encouraging open standards among projects that they were supporting so that there could be interoperability and greater competition among innovators on the ground. And then came the hard question, which was, is there any good systematized body of evidence that with actionable tools that helps us understand when certain kinds of open business models are really effective and when they're not, right? Because they don't attract the capital required. And I realized, no, there's none out there, at least 3 years ago. Most of us who work in this domain on the business and engineering side, folks are out in the field just making things happen, right? And then the academics that study these approaches are siloed. And so the lawyers at law schools will tell you a lot about different kinds of licenses and different kinds of patent rights and copyright, fair use exemptions and blah, blah, blah. But they don't really have that sense of how and why this matters in getting the financing that you need to cover the cost to go out there and get something done. Or how this might play a role in attracting and retaining the engineers or the scientists you'll need to solve a problem and so forth. So I said, okay, it's not, I don't know of it. Give me a few years. We've got a community at Duke that are experts in different parts of this problem. Let's see if we can come together and get some traction on this. I came back, and a lot of the senior experts at Duke, top figures in patent law and innovation economics, all over the place, senior faculty, and this is relevant to thinking about how your own universities might develop programs like this. Senior faculty already have their agendas, right? And they're so busy, right? So we got the emotional support of senior faculty, and the courageous ones were willing to kind of lend us the gravitas of their names. So like, okay, go ahead and create this thing. But the energy came from the students and postdocs. And they're the ones who are doing internships abroad and on the ground seeing these problems. They're the ones who are on social media where there's vibrant discussion. A new technology platform comes out, and what may get covered in Bloomberg as like, oh, this is this game changer thing. It's in social media where there's a vibrant debate about, okay, what's the price going to be in India for this, right? And who's going to have access to it? And And in South Africa, is there even going to be a commercializer at all? And it's the students that are in tune to that. So we ended up, it was a fairly kind of grassroots, bottom-up initiative, and we decided that we wanted to be different in a number of ways. That first of all, it seemed to us from the experience we did have in open innovation that successful open innovation strategies, whether it's open source software, whether it's open access MOOCs or the Khan Academy or open journals, whether it's some of the IP pooling in biopharmaceuticals that has enabled genomic science that gives us the promise of personalized medicine that Dr. Reynolds talked about possible, right? Looking at these, the architects of these approaches integrated the strategy between legal, financial, organizational, technical, and dare I say, imagination variables. And what we were all familiar with was that when solving a problem, that sometimes it appears like you can't move forward in one way. If you can change one of these variables, sometimes something that seemed impossible becomes possible. Sometimes the solution is technical. Sometimes the solution is legal. It's about a license or about hooking into an exemption under law. Sometimes it's about a creative financing tool. So we wanted to have not just to do research that was anchored around problems and cases, but not use the business school method of primarily focusing on, what's good or bad for the firm. Rather, kind of integrate, financial, legal, organizational, technical approach to these things. We worked across sectors because best practices are often siloed, and the biotech people don't talk to the energy people, and quite often there are solutions in one domain that might be helpful in another. To give you an example of one of our teams, the Global Healthcare Innovation Alliances team ended up going out and with a focus on how can we improve neglected disease research incentives and improve business models that make the outputs of neglected disease research accessible to especially countries where the most affected are poor. And this team ended up their questions led them to a series of meetings with key corporate and government officials in response to the Ebola crisis, which then led very quickly, and this gets to, I'll quickly wrap up, to a pivot where in studying what was going on, we ended up kind of having to invert our own approach and adapt, where talking with decision makers very quickly realized that they thought what we were doing was interesting, but they really wanted tools that they could use and apply. And so now the Ebola team is creating template licenses. They've been convening some of the major players and are working with the WHO office in Geneva, actually, on some materials for best practices for pandemic response. A team of freshman undergrads through PhD students, law students, faculty that were kind of tenure track faculty who are retired professionals coming from industry who are really passionate about having an impact. And so we ended up we came in thinking, all right, we're in a transformative moment. We're rethinking things. We got to do things differently. Let's go and learn. Then we organize ourselves and we'll adapt, right? But really, as Dr. Jones's presentation shows, what we've learned that we had to do was begin by going out there and engaging and listening adapting, learning from that process, and it's this iterative process where your new conceptions of what's going on follow your engagement in the field rather than the opposite. And so that led to a focus now on outputs, which is really exciting because it's helping the students and the faculty involved be engaged with people who are applying concepts that they're developing. And this is part of the story of where things ended up. I left to work with some of the industry people that I met through this work to found an independent organization focused on applying open innovation strategies in policy reform, in industry business models, and after dealing with the academic hierarchies that may or may not be open to such flexible approaches, the lab is fading out, and it's being replaced by an open source initiative that will carry on a lot of the lab's work in a different entity of the university, where one of the senior directors is a champion of the lab's work and has created a space for an open source initiative. There's funding from Red Hat, actually, to promote the teaching of collaboration, from software to media design to policy development and so forth. So happy to take questions later, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate the kind of real-life experience that you had in dealing with the Innovation Technology Policy Lab and also the Global Healthcare Innovation Alliances.